What's up guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Dean, aka the Blue Crusader. So, in today's Minecraft video, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to be making your Minecraft mod ideas in Minecraft. So, I'm going to be taking a few of the ideas that you guys submitted and make them into real mods in the game. So around a week or two ago, I actually put a post on my channel in the discussions tab and I asked you guys for mod ideas that you had for future mods. Now a few of you guys thought that I was asking for video ideas, but those of you who actually did send in mod ideas, it was actually for this video, and I sifted through a few of them and I took about 3 or 4 of the ideas, so I will probably be making maybe 2 or 3 more parts to this mini series of making your mods, because I thought it'd be really interesting to try as a little bit of a challenge. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be making one of the first mod ideas, which was submitted by Nicholas De Silva in the community section. I thought this idea was really unique and cool, so I thought I'd try it out. So in this video, I'm going to be making a few different mobs. So the first idea was to make one iron golem, but a specific illager type. So we'll be making an illager iron golem that spawns in the same biomes that the pillagers do spawn in. Then the Magma Cerberus, which is basically a 3-headed dog, so we're going to be making that. And a special cactus centipede. And finally, a little dragon or young dragon. So I'm going to be making all of these 4 different mobs in a special mod in this video. So first I decided to create a new workspace for the project. I decided that it would probably be best to use a newer version of Forge for this mod, so I decided to choose Minecraft Forge 1.14.4 just so that you guys can download it in the link in the description and try it on a more later version or build of Minecraft. This was going to be mostly just a mod that added new mobs, so it took me a little while to think of a name for it, but I thought of something fitting just to add a brand new collection of mobs to the endgame experience, so I decided to call the mod Endgame Mobs. So I had to get the model for the vanilla iron golem to start off, because the first mob which I was going to actually create was the illager golem, so I wanted to make a special illager slash pillager style of the iron golem, so kind of like a new variant as suggested from the idea. So I imported the vanilla iron golem model, which I had exported earlier by using the tabular model editor. Obviously the right animations for the different arm and leg movements will be something which I decide to fix later. Then I imported standard vanilla texture as well for the iron golem, because what I wanted to do is I wanted it to look the same, but I wanted to edit it so it looked slightly different, because if we were going to make an illager style, I want to make it slightly more darker. So I'm going to incorporate a lot of different colors here. I'm going to shade the eyes slightly reddish orange to make it look evil, and then instead of the green where all the vines are on the iron golem, I decided to make it a different plant altogether. So I was thinking about different dark colors which I could use, which would look kind of nice, and after going through a few different styles of greens, it always just ended up turning out looking the same. So what I decided to do is I decided to use a purple color and replace it with a purple vine, so it obviously still had the same shape and same texture, but it looks a little bit different to the vanilla one, which is green. So you'll see through this process I decided to make the vines purple. Now it doesn't look very advanced at this stage, okay, and there are a few yellow dots which I am actually leaving as yellow. I am going to go over those with a different colour later, but you'll see that I'm just using one flat colour, whereas the original texture has a lot of different types of greens and there's a few different opacities on the different pixels. Now I'm going over it with a flat colour, which doesn't look very good right now, but you'll understand why this is later. So obviously I'm going to repeat the whole process all over the skin, and then we'll fix up the different shading later. So after I'd completed the shading of the purple over the green, I decided to replace all of the different gold pixels with a dark red shade. This kind of made it look really evil and made a distinction between the two different dark colours. I really wanted to make a dark style, and I think a red and purple was perfect. Obviously, usually the illager mobs have a lot of greys and darker colours in them rather than purples, but it's still cool. Now you'll see that after this, the skin changed a lot, okay? This is because I used the tool called the noise tool, which a lot of different skin editors have, and it's usually called either the noise tool or the camouflage tool. And what that does is it basically adds multiple different shades of that one colour that you've used all around the skin, and it makes it look a lot better. Because right now I used a lot of flat purple of only one specific shade. So now, as you can see, what I did first is I made the skin darker, and then I used the noise tool to add more shades of purple and all of the other pixels, and then after I did that, I just went over it with the red to make the eyes more distinct, and then I saved the skin. So now the skin looks a lot more darker, but there's a lot of different colours to it instead of just the boring one colour of purple which I used. This is a strategy which I use on all of my skins because I'm not an amazing pixel artist, so I'm not very good with all of the different shades of a colour, but by using the noise tool I can completely negate this being a problem. So after I'd actually imported the model and imported the Iron Golem texture and completely edited it so it had a fresh new look, this is the stage where I decided to actually create the first scripted entity. So what this basically means is the living entity is just another word for a mob, and I made the mob, and then what I did is I obviously set up all the different properties and selected the right model that we'd imported as well as the correct texture. The rest was just very simple things like changing the colour of the spawn egg and setting certain different properties such as the creative tab where the item spawns. Then I messed around with the sounds. Obviously this is an Iron Golem, so I wanted to just reuse the vanilla Iron Golem sounds because I didn't really have time to make any custom sound effects for this, and I thought since they're both Iron Golems, the vanilla original sounds would be perfect. Now I wanted this new Iron Golem to have a lot of similar properties to the vanilla Iron Golem, so what I did is I opened up the wiki page so I had a reference for all of the different properties and characteristics of the Iron Golem. For an example, I wanted to see how much health it had and what attack damage it did and what it dropped. This was going to be the inspiration for my new mob because I didn't want this mob to be even more overpowered than how normal golems are, because if you attack a normal golem in single player they do a lot of damage to you, so I wanted to make them fair to fight and make them a little bit slower so they weren't too much of a threat. So normal Iron Golems have around 100 hearts, so I made my Iron Golem have 100 health, and then I checked out the attack strength and I based it off the normal attack strength of Iron Golems because I don't like to base my mobs off the damage that they do in hard mode. I made the drop a totem of undying because it kind of fit around the whole pillager and illager theme of the mob, and then I made the attack strength 7 just like how the normal Iron Golems are. You can make it immune to different things, although I decided not to. Now next up is the particles. I wanted it to have a really cool nice particle around it, so I chose the purple witch effect because of the purple colour that the mob had. And then the final step was to modify the AI of the mob. Now at first I just decided to select the Iron Golem AI, but I did have to fine tune this a lot because a lot of the different aspects weren't working so well when I actually got around to test it. For the spawning conditions, I wanted it to be a hostile mob as it was, but I wanted it to spawn during the day like things like creepers do. I didn't want them to set alight in the night time like zombies and skeletons do, so I decided to put it in the creature spawn group and spawn only 1 to 2 in each different group. Now the actual biomes that I decided to spawn it in was going to be based off the different biomes that the pillager outpost structure is possible to spawn in. This is just so it actually makes sense where it can actually spawn, so this was only restricted to all of the biomes that the wiki said that you could find the pillager outposts at. I hadn't actually found a way to spawn them in the pillager outposts or spawn them in villages, so this was the next best thing to spawn them in the correct biomes. So it was time for the first test. This would be the first test of many. Now the mob actually worked out really well on the first test. It did everything that I actually wanted it to do. As you can see, it is moving, the model is working and the texture is working, and it actually looks really great. Even the particles are in the right place, and although it's slightly overpowered, just how Iron Golems are, it does work really well because I was using the Iron Golem AI, so it also incorporated how it uses both arms to throw you up in the air when it hits you. Now this would be something which I'd have to remove because unfortunately there was a few problems later that I had with some of the AI tasks which we will cover. Now you'll notice that the limbs aren't moving, the legs aren't moving, and neither are the arms. This is just an animation problem with the different bones, which is something we'll fix a little bit later. So this is the first time you'll see me use the software Blockbench. This is what I use to make all the really simple and basic models for my mods. Now it's only recent that I've actually been trying to make some custom models, and they are obviously really basic because they're just comprised of cubes for Minecraft. But one of the problems is for the vanilla models, which I like to use for the mods, I export them from the game using a model mod called Tabular. And when you export these, by default the bones have really weird names. So when you try to actually animate them, as you can see here, they are called some really weird names such as field underscore and then a number. Now one way to get around this is rename all of them and then save the model again, but I just opened the model just for reference and just clicked on all the different bones just so I knew which bone was what corresponding to each number, so I could actually apply the different animations to them. You'll see that obviously as I'm checking for reference, I'm applying the different left and right arm swings and left and right leg swings as well. This is just so when we test it next time, everything will have movement and look normal. So after I fixed the animations, I wanted to make the AI tasks a little bit more complex, so I decided to not use the Iron Golem base. I decided to make some of my own custom tasks. So I tried to make the Iron Golems open doors, and as well as open doors, I tried to make them break doors. This is something which zombies do to villagers and village houses. So I wanted to do this just to make them more scary, and also if they happen to spawn near a village, I wanted them to cause a little bit of damage, and also just open the doors and cause havoc versus villagers. This is because I wanted to make them an enemy of the villagers, just how pillagers are. And then also I added an attack on sight command, and I changed the entity to the villager mob so that the new golem would actually attack villagers on sight. So what they do is they'd open doors, break down doors, and hunt down villagers which were close by. The second test was not entirely successful, as I did actually spawn some villagers around the golem, but when I provoked it, it just decided to run away and didn't really do anything to the villagers at all. This was a problem because when you attacked it, it just shied away. But one positive is that the animations which I'd actually set up for its walk cycle were working properly now. So I messed with the AI tasks again, and I decided to remove a few. I decided to remove it just looking around and to disable it to swim. I didn't want it to swim at all, so I removed this while I had the chance. And I also removed the panic when attacked command, because this basically means that when it gets attacked, it'll just go into panic mode and just completely run away and shy away from any form of combat. This was of course why it wasn't attacking the villagers like it should have done. And before testing for the third time, I decided to remove and move around a few of the different things in terms of priority. So I wanted it to open and break doors as the last thing that was prioritized, and I decided to also change the movement around a little bit. So what I did was I disabled the wander around and avoid water and replaced it with wander around enable walking, which is basically the same thing, but it just completely removes anything to do with water, because this is obviously a land mob and it's not going to go in the water anyway since it can't swim. Then I added a melee attack command to it as well and decided to test it out once more. So this test was actually super successful. I decided to spawn a lot of villagers this time and a lot of the golems just to see if they would attack them, and as you can see here, the golems do actually chase them down pretty hardcore, and they just keep punching the villagers until the villagers die, and they do a lot of damage as well. They basically 2 or 3 shot them, so you can see the aggressive AI does actually work and they will hit them. Obviously, since it's not now based off the Iron Golem AI, they don't knock up the player as much as they did before like golems do, but they are aggressive and they do damage the player, but mainly only when you provoke them and attack them first. This mob is just mainly aggressive and dangerous to villagers. So after the Illager Golem was completely done and the first mob was out of the way, the second mob which was suggested was actually the Cerberus, which is a mythological 3-headed dog. And the idea of this was to create a so-called magma Cerberus where it had some kind of orange texture or particle effect, which is something which I do a little later. So I decided to open the modeling software once more and I loaded the wolf model because we wanted it to have the appearance of a dog and the same sort of general size. Obviously it would usually be a lot bigger than a wolf, but I decided to open the vanilla wolf model just to get the right dimensions and sizes. Now this was actually a tough thing to make because what I had to do is I had to basically duplicate the wolf heads and then build up on the heads and basically create a completely new model at the same time. So this is a modified wolf and it turned out really nice in the end, although there's a lot of trial and error actually involved in this modeling process. process, so I'm just going to cut the main parts out of it and make it into a time lapse. I did actually give up after I duplicated all of the different wolf heads because it just looked like a three-headed wolf from Minecraft and it just didn't look right. So you will see a little bit later in this time lapse, you'll see that I do actually start to construct a completely new face and head to the model. Obviously I would duplicate this new head, but it looks a whole lot better than using just the wolf one did. It was actually a really interesting challenge to just basically scrap the original wolf head and just completely make a new one. What I wanted to do is I wanted to add a few different extra details, but obviously since the model was pretty small in terms of the dimension and also the texture resolution was pretty small, it was kind of impossible to add too many details to it. But I did add a few cubes in the top front of the jaw and the back of the lower jaw just to add some different teeth in there, just to make it look a little bit more menacing. I did actually add a pair of square ears on the top as well, and just a little tongue in the middle just to make it look like it was some kind of drooling beast. Obviously when this is going to be textured in a few moments this will look a lot better, but with the whole new jaw and the teeth coming out, it does look a lot more menacing than the standard Minecraft wolf. This head looks a lot better, and with a little bit of extra work it looks better than the wolf model previously did. Now you will see some differences here. The wolf's body is a lot thicker to the left and right, and it's a little bit taller in height, and also what I've done is I've made the wolf's legs a lot thicker as well so they look stronger. This is just because I wanted it to look a little bit larger than the wolf does and make it just look a little bit wider and bigger, because this is a Cerberus, it's not just a pet dog, so it needs to look really cool. And then the only last step left to do in terms of actually building the shape was to duplicate the head 2 different times, so there was 3 different heads on the front of it. This was important obviously to make it a 3-headed dog, and I'd already considered and thought about this exact thing moments before. That's why I made the body wider as well, so it actually had space for the other 2 heads so they weren't just floating in midair. I also did modify the tail, which you might be able to see at the back. Now the interesting thing about this model is the only rotating joints which are going to be animated are just the legs of it, so things like the tail can look pretty complex and I don't need to worry about how they actually look when moving. The only thing left to do was just to make a texture to actually paint it and make it look a bit more realistic. So I created a new texture template. The great thing about blockbench is you can just create a new texture based on your model, so you can just paint on it in the software. The reason why I like this software is because it's really easy to resize all the cubes to make models with. It's probably the most straightforward Minecraft modeling software, and you can make a texture really easily from a template. And then all you have to do is just go into the painting tab and you can mess around with it and just paint directly on it, and you don't need to know anything about texture maps. So what I did here was I wanted to find a unique color which I could paint this. Now the original concept was to make a magma Cerberus, which is kind of like a molten or on fire dog sort of thing, but what I wanted to do is I decided to actually use particles for that later. I wanted to make it a sort of dark brown fantasy looking dog, which is what I decided to do. Now the rest of this is obviously just painting the red eyes, painting the brown on the body, and just making sure everything is covered in the right colours, and painting things like the teeth and the tongue. So this is just going to be a time lapse of the whole painting stages and just painting everything together. Like what we did before at the start of the video with the Golem, this is going to be in very basic shades. This is just going to be very basic shades of brown, mostly just one shade of each colour, and then later I will use the same tools in the texture editor to add noise to the texture so there's different variants of shades and colours there. And after that time consuming process, I was done, so I just saved the texture and I downloaded the model and got ready to import it into the mod itself. It really matters what version of the game you export it for. For an example, if you export it for 1.12, you can use it for 1.15, but you can't use newer models with older versions of the game. So I exported it for 1.14 because that was the version that I was making this mod for, aka 1.14.4. I then removed all of the white space and the branding from the top of the Java file in a text editor, because when you import the model, sometimes it does glitch out if you don't remove the text. Now, something interesting which I didn't actually realize at this time is when exporting with newer versions like 1.14, some of the animations aren't actually there, so I did decide to re-export the model as a 1.12 model to make sure I could actually animate it. So I made another really basic mob just with the custom model and the texture, just to load it into the game to make sure it worked first before I built it completely. And in game, when I actually trialed it out and spawned it with the egg, I was pretty impressed with how the model looked. Obviously it was a pretty small size, just like a wolf. Even though I'd made it a bit bigger, it was still pretty small scale, but it looked pretty cool, a three-headed wolf. Now obviously there was no movement or animations, I would fix this later, and the texture looked really basic, but it did look like basically your standard evil devil dog like of Call of Duty 5, so I was pretty impressed with it at this stage. So obviously fur is based off a lot of different colours, so I added the noise to it to add more darker browns and blacks to the texture and saved it to test it out to make the fur more realistic. You can already see so much difference from just this really tiny little texture change. You can see now with all the different browns and blacks and greys in there, it looks a lot more realistic. You can see the fur itself looks like there's some actual texture to it and colour to it, whereas before it just looked like a cartoon. So this just made the mob look a bit more realistic and evil, and it just looks a whole lot better than the texture which we had before, which looked like a noob made the mod. So now that I knew the model actually worked and everything was fine in game, I decided to set up the animations on the Cerberus as well. And the great thing about modeling the Cerberus was the fact that I actually labeled all of the different limbs as the right words, so everything was called left leg, front leg, and it was really easy to find which bones that I had to animate. So I decided to set up the mob properly. So I selected the custom model that we had and I started setting up the sounds. So I made the sounds a mix between the blaze sounds, the wither sounds and the wolf growls, because this was supposed to basically be a three-headed devil dog, so I wanted it to have some really dark looking sounds. Then what I did is I changed the health values. This is supposed to be a tough endgame mob, so I made it have 35 health and dropping magma creams and making it a little bit invulnerable to certain different attacks. I made it base itself off the wolf AI, and then I added and changed a few different AI values. The most awesome thing which you'll see is the fact that it actually drips lava particles around it, so this is why it's actually a magma Cerberus, because instead of making the texture orange, I decided to make it drip lava instead. And now it was time for the final moment of testing, and you can see the lava particles look absolutely awesome. As the Cerberus walks along, it actually drips all of the lava behind it. This is a really cool effect which I was actually really happy with in the end, and you can see it actually works really well. I think this works better than if I just made the skin on fire or an orange wolf. I think this looks a lot better. Now you can see it does actually look pretty scary with those red eyes, and if you watch it carefully you can see that now the legs are actually fully animated, so it does actually walk normally as well. And you can even see in the background the illager golem is still going for that villager in the map. The spawner egg is also changed as well now, so I did change it to match the sort of colours of its theme, so it does have some oranges and reds in there because it is a magma Cerberus. But in the end, I'm just really content and happy with how this turned out. The dripping lava just makes it look really awesome, and if you found one of these guys in the nether, which is where I decided to spawn it later, I think you'd be either pretty terrified or you'd be in awe of seeing just something so awesome. And this is what it looks like when it's spawned in the nether itself. You can see the lava effect which is dripping off it works a whole bunch more, and what's really nice is the fact that the lava stays on the ground for a little while whilst it drips before it dissipates away, which looks really awesome. Now when it's actually on the netherrack in the fire, this thing looks super terrifying. I think the only difference that we could have maybe changed in this Cerberus is maybe made it a bit larger to make it more imposing, but apart from that, I'm really happy with the final outcome. Next up was to create the Centipede. One of the other ideas, which was the third mob I believe, was to make a so-called cactus centipede. Now I wasn't sure if this was just a centipede that eats and crawls over cactus, or if they actually wanted me to make a centipede with a cactus-like texture. Now I went for the latter because I thought it would be a nice challenge to make a mob which blended in with cactus. Of course I did end up making it darker in the end, so it wasn't exactly the cactus texture, but I think it's still pretty cool to have a centipede that spawns in the desert biomes. So what I did is I basically just based it off the Cerberus model, and this model is probably not so good in comparison to the others. I think this is probably the worst mob model which I did make, but I wasn't really sure how I would actually tackle this. Now you can see what I'm doing is I'm duplicating the legs, but centipedes, they actually have 100 legs, okay? So this was going to be pretty tough to make in a 100-legged mob in the Minecraft game basically, because the downside of this is I wasn't really sure how to make different joints in the mob. For an example, I wasn't sure how to make the different segments of it actually move up and down when it walks, which is something which I actually realized I probably could have done now. I think I realized how to do that, but at the time when making this, I wasn't really sure how I was going to tackle that, so it did turn out not as good in the end in terms of its movement. But I made the body and the thorax basically a whole lot longer, and I just kept duplicating the legs multiple times until I had a lot of different legs. Well, basically until I had 100 legs. So I waited till I had 50, and then I duplicated 50 onto the other side, and then I started adding a few different things onto it as well. So I added a pair of antennas on the front. I didn't want to make this too detailed. It's not extremely detailed. It does have a few different body sections because I thought it just being one long body piece being the same side would get a little bit boring. So I did end up making a few different torsos, which you can see are labeled appropriately, and each torso segment which I made, or most of them, actually got a little bit larger, so you can see they are actually a little bit bigger the further back it goes on its body. And I made it a little bit wider to make it a bit more imposing, and then I started to create the texture from a template. Now I wanted to make this a really basic texture, and like the method which we've been using all throughout this video with the texture editor later, I am going to add noise to the texture, and basically that will just make it have more shades of the green color. So I was going to make this very flat and a really basic texture because I could just use the noise tool to account for my poor texturing skills. So I colored the antennas a slightly different shade of green and the front legs a slightly different shade of green on the first segment, and I added some basic eyes and a mouth in there, and I wanted to also make each segment a different shade of green the further back it goes. This is a little bit random, but I thought it might be a nice effect just to make it look a bit more awesome, although it's not quite realistic. So I slightly changed the shade of color in the color picker, and I made it change the further back it got. So then it was time to create the mob. So I imported the texture and the model into the game, and I made it have different sounds of spider and the slime sounds, and I made it into a creature so it was passive, and an arthropod because it's an insect, and I added the loot as being the cactus because it was a cactus centipede. This was a really simple one. I added some AI tasks, changed some tasks to make it a little bit more passive, and changed the different biomes to the desert ones to spawn in, and we were basically done on that regard for now. Then what I did is I added the noise to the texture to make it more advanced, and it was time to test it for the first time. At first, on the first test, the walking animation looked kind of cool, even though it looked really stupid. The way they actually made it walk looked kind of cool, but the only problem was, as you can see, the middle body did not work. This was a problem which I had to fix in the model of the bone groups. So what I did is I went into the model editor, grabbed all the torso pieces together, and just made it into a folder called body, and that's just how I fixed that. And the next time that I launched it, everything was basically fixed, although now that the body was actually there, the walking animation for it crawling I didn't really like. So I changed the animations and decided just to have no animations on it. I did mess around with the crawling animations a little bit, but in the end I didn't really like how they appeared, and I just couldn't get them to work right, so I decided just to leave them as having no animation. I was happy with the final turnout. It was a little bit glitchy because the centipede can go through rocks and blocks because it's just so long, but when it jumps, that's probably the worst part because the segments don't move based on what object it's in, so it basically just stretches on forever even though it's on one block, so it doesn't really make sense. But the final product was still pretty nice, and if you put it on a flat surface, I'm sure this centipede would look super creepy and awesome. After all, this guy is supposed to spawn in the desert, so you won't be finding it underground or on any weird block formations, so for the most part this should not really be a problem. So the final challenge was to make a baby dragon, so I decided to import the Vex model from vanilla Minecraft to base this off of, and I was going to make it slightly larger and change the face and a few of the joints to make it actually look like a dragon. But this was the perfect one to base it off because it was a small flying winged mob which I could change to my liking. So I'm going to show you the whole modeling process right now, basically as a time lapse, and this thing did actually last quite a long time. It took a long time to actually model all of these parts, and it was a pretty huge challenge to make this. This is because I had to make the tail and then I had to make the legs, but I had to make the legs bigger and make them into two parts and also add claws to them and make them more reptilian like. So it was a bit of a tough challenge because for the most part the Vex just looks like a normal Minecraft player model. There's nothing really too exciting about it. The only reason why I actually started off with it is just that it had wings already and it was in the perfect setup. Now I did actually want to animate the dragon, but the fact that the Vex already had all of the rotation points set whilst I was making it became kind of a problem. That's why I didn't animate any of the legs right now. Now I do actually want to add wing animations into this as well, so when you actually download this mod in the description you might actually see this having wing animations. I'm not sure yet, but this is not something which I added during this process because I just wasn't sure which of the rotations I had to select for the animation. When you select an animation you can have different swinging on the X and Y axes, and I wasn't really sure which one was the best for the wings, but for the most part it's just trial and error for applying the right animations once you've set up the rotation points. This may sound a little bit confusing, but this is how the process works. Now you can see that I'm setting up some dragon legs and it looks kind of stupid at this point, but you don't have to worry about that later because as you can see I do actually make the legs shorter and pull them up because I still want this thing to be small. I don't want it to look really long and not like a dragon. Now this looks like I'm making a bird beak, but I'm actually making the dragon's mouth and then I'm adding a nose piece on the top. Now this nose piece actually looks really awesome. I wish I actually still had it, but I did actually have to remove it unfortunately because the texture just wouldn't apply to the nose piece when I decided to paint it. Then I also added a pair of horns to the top to make it more dragon-like, and I made the arms a little bit longer. Then after I made the arms longer, I decided to make a few different cuboids just to make the claws on the dragon. It was kind of hard to make detailed claws, but I decided just to make 4 claws on each hand so it looks like it could go on all 4s if it needed to. And then what I did is I did the same thing on each side. Now the arms were in different rotation points, so I couldn't just copy and paste them over. So what I did is I just copy and pasted the actual arm themselves and then resized the arm into the 4 different claws. This made it look a lot more like a dragon than just using the Vex model, and the fact that I actually had the hind legs, which I changed into 2 parts, made it look even more awesome. I made a second torso piece as a pelvis just to cover up how the legs were because I made them wider and added separation between them, and then what I did is I started actually adding some claws to the bottom of the feet to look like it could have some grip, and then it actually started looking like a dragon. At this point I was actually really proud with how I'd actually edited this model. Everything was coming together and this thing actually looked really good. I think the only thing which I want to change and add in the future, possibly if I make changes to this mod, is just group all of the things together as the legs and then add actual animations. I want to add walking animations and the flapping of the wings on this mob to make it slightly more realistic and actually like a dragon. So after I did this, everything was set up and ready to texture, and we were ready to move on to the second stage, and I just renamed the project name to the name of the dragon just so when I exported it, it would be correct. I was really happy with this, so I decided to make the texture template and move on to start painting. So the dragon model looked super amazing in my opinion when it was finished, and then we're on the stage to actually paint the thing. It already looked really awesome as a base, but I was really interested to see how it would look when we actually coloured it in with real colours and started to texture it. This was a slow and grueling process, so obviously I have sped it up as usual. I had to go around and fill in all of the different parts of each limb and make sure that I didn't leave any areas untextured, otherwise they would of course be transparent in the game and the thing would be glitchy. Now usually I would obviously select blue because that's my favourite colour, but with dragons in Minecraft some of them look really awesome when you colour them red, so I wanted to see what a red dragon would turn out as in the game. Of course I was going to use a few different shades for this, so I decided to make the horns yellow instead of white, and also make the wings yellow, and the red and yellow colour palette and theme actually worked off each other really well. And then after I'd shaded everything in yellow, I made the eyes yellow. I couldn't really decide how I wanted the eyes to look initially, but I decided to make those yellow too because they looked really awesome. Now I did actually resize the dragon's mouth just to make it a little bit smaller because it was too wide in comparison to the eyes, so I wanted to scale things a bit better. And in the end I decided to make the eyes orange as well as yellow, just to add a little bit of a distinction between the two colours I was using. I decided to go around and make two different nose openings and also the mouth details, just so it looked like the dragon actually had a mouth and it wasn't closed. Then I made a kind of different texture on the body. It does look like it could be fur on a wolf, but it's not, it's just the dragon's body piece. And after that I decided to go around and shade in and fill in all of the different claws on the legs and the claws on the hand, just to get towards a finishing point on the skin. Now one thing that I can actually see that I didn't do, which I probably should have done at this stage, is there's actually no tail on this dragon. At the very start of this process when I was making it from the Vex model, I did actually have a third leg which was going to be the tail of the dragon, but I did delete it and I forgot to add it back into this. So I have realised right now that I probably should have added an extra tail to this mob. That's something which I overlooked and completely forgot, and in hindsight and retrospect I probably should have added that in there. It probably would have looked even more awesome if I actually had a tail on the dragon. But I was pretty much done with it at this point, and like I said before, we were just going to go over it with the noise tool just to touch it up a little bit and make the texture look better and import it into the software in our project. So obviously you can see all of the different limbs are labelled perfectly, but I didn't set up any animations. So we'll add a little bit of noise to it so it looks like it has a really nice texture, and then we'll jump into actually making this dragon mob. I'll colour the spawn egg orange and red and add some ender dragon sounds to the mob. I'll add the health value to around 20 and I'll make the creature passive so it doesn't attack because it's a baby dragon, and make it invulnerable to lightning and fire. Then I'm going to base the entity off nothing. I'm actually going to make a custom AI value for this, and I'm going to make it actually shoot magma out of it when you attack it. I'm going to spawn it in groups of 1 to 4 as a monster, which should spawn it around nighttime, and this is what the final product looks like. I'm really happy with how this turned out, although it is slightly glitchy in its stomach at the bottom, this yellow, as well as the tail which I added in the end. After I realised I didn't have a tail, I did add an additional tail, so you can see it is slightly glitchy on the texture, but that's just basically because I added this after I'd already textured it, so it kind of messed it up a little bit. But I'm really happy with how the texture turned out when we added the noise to it. The legs look really nice, the wings look great, and you can see it does drop the items which are bones. It's a really nice turnout and I'm really impressed with it. Like I said before, it is a flying mob, so it does slowly hover and fly, but if we did want to make it better, we would obviously add the animations to the wings, which I am actually going to do at some point after this video in the future. And that is the end of this video. This is possibly one of the longest videos which I've actually made. That's because I wanted to show you an overview of the whole process that I do when making mods and just making mobs in general. Now, nothing is perfect because this is obviously a small time frame that I was working under so that I could make this video. What I've just showed is the overview of all of the mobs which we've actually made thus far, and I have to say that the final turnout of all of them was really cool, and I'm impressed with the work that we put into them and the really cool ideas that I've been given. I think my favourite mob which we made in today's video was probably the Magma Cerberus. I'm really happy with how the model turned out, and I probably put the most work into both that and also the baby dragon. So I think the baby dragon, although it has a lot of improvements that need to be made, I think the baby dragon is probably the second best, and then the first best is the Magma Cerberus, but I also like the very basic ones like the Golem too. So if you enjoyed this mods video where we made some of your suggested mods from the community, from my subscribers, then definitely like the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new, and also leave a comment below any ideas for mods, and maybe I'll make another episode of this series and make some of your ideas into mods. So thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you next time.